Welcome back everybody, and thanks for joining us once again. Today we are testing the new Storm Phaze V. If you like what we do, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe and check us out on Patreon. First impressions, the Storm Phaze V is just as good as the Phaze 4 it replaces, maybe even a little better. I will say shiny covers are back at Storm. Alright, so let's get into it. I guess I pretty quickly spilled the beans on the Phaze V, and it should be no surprise considering it's the same cover stock and core as the Phaze 4. I'll try to avoid repeating the previous review. The Phaze V was really easy to toss on this walled up house condition. There are some characteristics that aren't always conducive for shiny equipment like this, especially from the left side. You know, quick response can lead to overly strong reaction from outside while floating a little bit in the oil inside. The R2S is a pretty responsive cover, but does take on a bit of more of a booming shape off the friction as opposed to an absolute hook set reaction. So when you hit the friction, it does push just a touch, but is still quite responsive. Still gives you some ability to manage it from the friction. The only thing I would say is just watch your speeds when you hit the friction. The nice thing is that with the big velocity core, the ball looks great from deeper break points, so despite the shiny cover, the core gets going and still does a great job returning to the pocket and carrying. I could move quite a bit on the lane and find the pocket, so ultimately, yeah, I would say it rolled pretty much just like the Phaze 4. The question for me is, where does this fit in the arsenal? Well, and I've said it before, most balls with R2S Pearl work their way down in my bag to somewhere around the mid-late category. And I think this is probably no different. I mean, R2S just doesn't have enough bite to handle a little bit higher volumes despite the big velocity core. The Phaze 3 did make it to the mid-defined, but it has a different cover, and while this isn't massively weaker, it's just got a bit lower bite to push it down the bag. Alright, so let's just cover the final thoughts. I do have a couple balls here for comparison, which I'll do a separate video, but you can still see that the infinite Physix here fits in the mid-defined category, being a bit stronger than the Phaze V. You can also see that the Night Road is less ball overall than the Phaze V. That's kind of crystal clear. I would say reaction shape-wise, the Infinite and Night Road are siblings, while the Phaze V is like a first cousin to them. They'd fit like this, I think, in a bag. So Infinite Physix would be a mid-defined, Phaze V would be a mid-late plus, let's say, and then the Night Road is a straight mid-late. You then have to decide if you need all three, but I think you probably can get away with just two of those, so it'll be an interesting question for each of you as you fill your bag. Next up, we have Tyler testing the Physix 5. Now, he didn't get a chance to test the Physix 4, so there isn't any perspective or bias coming in. He immediately liked the smoother round shape of the R2S cover on this ball, but distinctly didn't like the over-under at the pins. So if I had to nitpick here, the reactive gloss finish was going bye-bye. It took a couple too many 10 pins to see that the ball just needed a bit more bite. So we took a 2000 pad and ever so gently scuffed it just to get the high gloss off, and you can immediately see the difference. Nothing major other than now it carried the corner every time versus leaving it. So same shape, and now the carry supported what Tyler enjoyed with his eyes initially. The sort of longish motion, but the rounded, booming response to friction. And this is really an important case in point. Do not be afraid to alter surfaces. This very small change with a handy set of Abalone pads turned the Phaze V from essentially an unusable ball for Tyler to a carry monster, all while looking identical everywhere else on the lane. The difference is so subtle, but that maybe half to foot earlier reaction had such a huge impact. Tyler could strike for days with that rounded reaction that his eyes liked and therefore could get very comfortable throwing. The interesting thing is the comparison to the Night Road. I talked about how both of these balls are mid-late, and they are as well for Tyler. However, he still had a preference ultimately for the Night Road. And while he had a great look with the Phaze V, he actually had, I would say, slightly opposite situation than me in terms of ball strength. Because of his rev rate, he didn't really lose any strength with the weaker inverted FE2 core as opposed to the velocity core here. However, we know the Night Road cover is stronger, which ultimately meant more teeth and more movement overall, and I think a bit more reliable look to his eye. So while he saw a bit more strength with the Night Road while I saw a bit less, I think the end result of our preference was the same. Bryan was next with the Phaze V. For context, the Phaze III remains in his bag as a mid-late type ball. It has been a very reliable motion with a clean look and strong down lane motion. So when Bryan finds a ball that has a consistent and driving hit through the pins, it's staying in the bag. And we test a lot of balls. And I would say that goes for the Zen and Marvel Pro for him, which are also still in the bag. So in a way, he would have some idea or at least hope for the Phaze V ball motion. As Tyler and I saw, the Phaze V was consistent in that it had a rounder shape overall. He had just tested the Sky Raptor, and coming off of that, the hook set feature of that ball was very distinct as compared to the smoother, rounder shape of the Phaze V. In fact, it was so much smoother, it almost looked earlier, but it really isn't. The R2S just has a different characteristic, which a lot of times allows it to be more usable. So he could play the same line as he did, say, with the Sky Raptor and get the same result, albeit with a very different shape. There is still a possibility of over-under with the Phaze V and the R2S cover if you aren't careful. The ball could still start too soon if you grab it, and it will overhook. It could also fluff if you don't get enough on it. But generally, there was a decent space and some room to play with. The other thing was that because of that rounder shape, he could move in incrementally and still get drive through the pins. So not having that hook set motion actually helps Bryan have way more room to move. And it's really the reason why the Zen, Phaze III, and Marvel Pearl are in his bag. The symmetric shiny balls tend to just give him more room to play. Let's round this off with my final thoughts. All in all, the Phaze V is a good ball that would fit in the mid-late part of the bag for almost all style bowlers. It may be on the stronger side or weaker side depending on your style, but the R2 Pearl's medium strength ensures that its preference will be for a bit of like medium to lighter conditions, while the big velocity core gives it some consistency in its roll. Don't be afraid to change the surface. It's probably the biggest change you can make. Good luck deciding what you want to put in your bag in this category.